Brad and Emily Parker seemed like the perfect couple, until a hidden affair tore their world apart, leading to a shocking twist that no one saw coming. What began as a seemingly innocent betrayal would spiral into a deadly mystery, and Emily would soon learn that the man she had trusted with her life was capable of far darker secrets than she ever imagined. On the surface, they had it all: successful careers, 2 beautiful children, and a picture-perfect home in an affluent suburban neighborhood. Their lives seemed like a well-rehearsed script. Brad was the charming, hard-working husband who ran a local construction business, and Emily was the devoted wife who balanced raising their children with supporting Brad in every way imaginable. They were the couple that friends envied, the family that everyone admired. Their weekends were spent at barbecues, their vacations were filled with happy family photos, and their social media profiles showcased the image of a loving, ideal family. But behind the carefully curated images, things weren't always as perfect as they seemed. Brad had a secret. No one could have suspected it, least of all Emily. Their marriage, which seemed so strong on the outside, had begun to crumble under the weight of something Brad had been hiding for a long time. The truth was that he had been carrying on a secret affair for over a year, and Emily had no clue. The affair was with a woman named Allison. She was a colleague of Brad's, someone he met at a business conference. Their initial interactions were harmless, professional even, but as they spent more time together, something changed. What started as innocent flirtation turned into something more. Allison was everything that Emily wasn't: spontaneous, carefree, and unburdened by the responsibilities of family life. For Brad, the affair was a way to escape the pressures of his marriage, the mundane routine of daily life, and the growing emotional distance between him and Emily. The affair didn't happen overnight. At first, Brad justified it to himself as just a bit of fun, a brief escape from the stress of work and family obligations. He convinced himself that Emily would never find out, that he could keep both worlds separate. But as the affair continued, the lies grew, and keeping them hidden became more difficult. Brad began spending more time away from home, claiming it was for work or personal projects. Emily, always trusting, never questioned him. She admired his dedication to his career, never suspecting that his long hours were spent in the arms of another woman. Over time, the cracks in their marriage began to show. Emily noticed that Brad was growing more distant. He was often distracted, lost in thought, and less affectionate. He would go on business trips but return home later than expected, always with an excuse that seemed plausible at the time. Emily began to feel like something was off, but she didn't have any concrete evidence to confirm her suspicions. She chalked it up to stress, to the pressures of balancing family life with his career. It wasn't until small things began to slip through the cracks: Brad's phone habits, his late nights working on his laptop, his sudden disappearance for days, that Emily started to question him. Still, Brad's charm, his ability to reassure her, kept Emily from confronting the possibility of betrayal. He was always quick with excuses, always promising that everything was fine, that she was just overthinking things. And for a long time, she believed him. But as Emily began to pay closer attention, her doubts grew. Something wasn't right. Brad wasn't the man she married anymore, and the nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. What Emily didn't know was that her world was about to come crashing down. The affair was no longer something Brad could keep hidden, and the truth would eventually surface in a way neither of them could have ever anticipated. What seemed like a perfect life was about to shatter, starting with a single phone call, an investigation, and a story that no one could have predicted. As the months passed, Emily's unease grew, though she still couldn't put her finger on exactly what was wrong. There were little things, small inconsistencies in Brad's behavior, that added up. She noticed that he was becoming more irritable, snapping at her for trivial things. Their once effortless conversations began to feel forced, awkward. He was always distracted, constantly glancing at his phone or checking his emails, even when they were supposed to be spending time together as a family. The physical affection between them became less frequent, replaced by distant nods or polite pecks on the cheek. It felt as if a wall was slowly rising between them, and Emily couldn't figure out how to break it down. It wasn't just the way Brad was acting, but also how he was pulling away from their children. Their son Ethan and daughter Lily had always been the joy of their lives. But now Brad seemed disinterested in spending time with them. Emily would find him working late into the evening, or sometimes he would say he had a meeting that would keep him away for hours. On weekends, when he used to be the first one up to take the kids to the park or spend the afternoon doing something fun, he now claimed to be too tired or needed me time. Emily's suspicions deepened. She wasn't naive. She could tell something wasn't right. Still, she couldn't bring herself to directly confront Brad. The thought of accusing him without proof was terrifying. What if she was just imagining things? What if the stresses of life were simply getting to him? Her mind ran in circles trying to find explanations, but the doubts continued to linger. One evening, Brad came home particularly late. His excuse this time was vague, something about a client dinner that ran longer than expected. He seemed unusually evasive when Emily asked for details. His answers were curt, and he quickly retreated to his office as though eager to escape the conversation. That night, as Emily was cleaning up the kitchen, her eyes fell on Brad's phone, which was charging on the kitchen counter. It wasn't like her to snoop, but something made her hesitate. Her heart pounded in her chest and her mind raced. She knew it was wrong, but the urge to understand what was going on grew stronger by the minute. Without thinking, she grabbed the phone and unlocked it. She had no idea what she was expecting to find, but the moment the screen lit up, she was hit with a string of text messages. It wasn't just a single message or a brief exchange. It was a conversation, long and intimate, between Brad and someone she didn't know. The messages were affectionate, playful, and filled with private jokes, suggesting a deep connection that wasn't with her. Emily's hands shook as she scrolled, her stomach sinking with every word. The texts weren't about business or friendship. They were about love, longing, and shared moments. It didn't take long for Emily to piece it together. Brad was having an affair. The realization hit her like a wave. She felt numb, as if the ground beneath her had suddenly disappeared. It was as if everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her life, had been a lie. She had been blind to the signs, but now the truth was undeniable. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved for years, was betraying her in the most hurtful way possible. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and heartbreak. She replayed every moment in their marriage, searching for signs she had missed. How had she not seen it? How had Brad managed to hide something so significant for so long? But in her heart, Emily knew that her marriage was over. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. The next day, Emily hired a private investigator. She needed the truth. She had to know the full extent of Brad's betrayal before she could confront him. The investigator's task was clear. Follow Brad and gather evidence. Emily didn't want to believe it, but the reality was setting in. She had to face the painful truth head on. As the investigation began, Emily's world became even more uncertain. Every day, she waited for the investigator's updates, each call more nerve-wracking than the last. Soon, Emily would discover just how deep the betrayal ran, and how much darker things were about to get. Days passed in a blur of anxiety as Emily awaited the investigator's findings. She had always believed she knew her husband, his habits, his routines, but now, with each passing hour, that certainty was crumbling. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore, and yet, she found herself desperate for the investigator to confirm what she already knew. She wanted the evidence, something concrete that would force Brad to face what he had done. The investigator's first update came a week later. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her phone clutched in her hand, her heart racing. The investigator's voice was calm but direct. "I have the information you requested," he said. "Your husband has been seeing someone for over a year. I've followed him to several locations and I've gathered the evidence." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She asked him to go on, her voice barely a whisper. The investigator described the encounters in detail, how Brad had met the woman, how often they'd been together, and where. There were hotels, dinners, and even a few public outings, all hidden from her. Emily's mind spun as she tried to process it all. The woman was named Allison, and she wasn't just some casual fling. This affair had been serious. The investigator even mentioned how Brad had bought gifts for her, small tokens of affection that he'd never given Emily. He had built a life with Allison, one that was hidden from everyone, including his wife. Emily could barely contain the rush of emotions flooding through her. Betrayal, anger, heartbreak, and a deep sense of shame. She had been blind to it all. For so long, she had believed in the image of their perfect life, the facade that Brad had maintained so carefully. But now, it was all crashing down. She felt nauseous, her body shaking as she listened to the investigator's words. He had even sent her a few photos, grainy but clear enough to show Brad and Allison together, laughing over dinner, holding hands. Emily could hardly bear to look at them, but she knew she had to. The investigator wasn't finished. "I've also managed to get a video," he continued. "It's of Brad and Allison together in a hotel room. I'm not sure how much you want to see, but I thought you should know." Emily's stomach turned at the thought. The idea of seeing her husband, the man she had shared her life with, in such an intimate moment with another woman, was unbearable. But a part of her knew she had to see it to truly understand the depths of his betrayal. The truth had been hidden from her for far too long. She agreed to meet the investigator in person to view the footage, bracing herself for what was to come. Ithar. Next few days were a haze. Emily struggled to focus on anything: work, her children, even the simple tasks of daily life. Her mind was consumed by the images and videos she had seen, by the realization that her marriage was built on a foundation of lies. She kept thinking about how Brad had looked her in the eye every day, telling her he loved her, promising to be there for her and their children, while all along he had been living a double life. That evening, when the investigator arrived at her house, Emily felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice. She had no idea how she was supposed to confront Brad with this evidence, how to even begin the conversation. Everything she had believed in felt like a lie. Her world had shattered, and she wasn't sure if there was any way to put it back together. Sitting in front of the investigator, she watched the video. It was brief, intimate, and painful to witness. She wanted to look away, but she forced herself to watch it all. The pain of seeing Brad with another woman was unbearable, but it was the confirmation of everything she had feared. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, had betrayed her in the most devastating way possible. The video ended, and Emily sat in silence, her mind numb. There was no more doubt. Brad had destroyed everything. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew that there was no turning back. The woman who had been living in a lie would now face the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. The decision to confront Brad was the hardest Emily had ever made. With the weight of the investigator's evidence still fresh in her mind, she knew there was no avoiding the inevitable. It was no longer a question of whether she should confront him. It was a matter of when. The anger and hurt surged inside her like an unstoppable tide. But she couldn't shake the fear of how he would react. Would he confess? Deny it? Or would he try to gaslight her, convince her she was overreacting? Emily didn't know what to expect, but she knew she had to face him. That evening, after putting the children to bed, she waited for Brad to come home. The clock ticked slowly, each minute dragging on as she rehearsed what she would say. There was a part of her that still wanted to believe there was some explanation, some justification Brad could offer to make the pain go away, but deep down, she knew there was no excuse for what he had done. The betrayal was too deep. Brad came in just after 9 p.m., looking tired but oddly calm. He greeted her with a smile, asking if everything was okay. The casualness of his greeting made Emily's heart ache. How could he act so normal when everything between them was falling apart? How could he not feel the weight of the lies, the secrets? Emily didn't respond at first. She stood in the kitchen, holding her phone tightly in her hands, staring at him. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Brad sensing something was off, raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. But Emily wasn't fooled by his act anymore. His concern was for himself, not her. He wasn't worried about how she felt. He was worried about getting caught. "I know about the affair, Brad," Emily said, her voice steady, though it trembled, with the force of her emotions. The words hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud, and for a moment everything around them seemed to freeze. Brad's face changed instantly. The smile vanished, replaced by a flash of panic in his eyes. His eyes flickered to the phone in her hand. And for a split second, Emily saw a flicker of guilt in his expression. But it was fleeting. He quickly recovered his composure and gave a tight, forced smile. "Emily, this isn't what you think," he began, his voice defensive. But Emily wasn't listening anymore. She didn't want his excuses. She didn't want him to try to explain away the hurt. She had seen the evidence. She had seen the messages, the photos, the video. There was no more room for lies. "You've been seeing her for over a year, Brad," Emily said, her voice rising with the heat of her anger. "You've been lying to me, to our children, to everyone. You built a life with her while I was here, thinking everything was fine. What was I to you then? Just someone to play house with while you had your fun on the side?" Brad looked away, unable to meet her gaze. For a moment, Emily thought he might break down, apologize, and beg for her forgiveness. But instead, he took a deep breath and shook his head. "Emily, I didn't want to hurt you. I swear I didn't. I never meant for it to get this far." His words felt empty, like an attempt to absolve himself of the responsibility for what he had done. Emily felt the anger rising again, an uncontrollable fury that bubbled up inside her. How dare he try to make it sound like he was the victim? How dare he minimize the pain he had caused her? "I don't want to hear it, Brad," Emily said, her voice cracking with emotion. "You've made your choice, and now we both have to live with the consequences." The confrontation was everything Emily had feared and more. Brad's coldness, his failure to fully own his actions, left her feeling even more betrayed. He still tried to deny the extent of the affair, still tried to protect himself, and still couldn't acknowledge the devastation he had caused. Emily realized that this was it. This was the moment when everything changed. Their marriage, their family, everything she had worked for was now shattered beyond repair. Brad's inability to take full responsibility for his actions cemented the end of their relationship. As the conversation dragged on, Emily's mind was made up. She couldn't stay in a marriage with someone who didn't respect her, someone who had lied to her for so long. The man who had once been her partner, her confidant, was now a stranger, someone she could no longer trust. The next step was inevitable. She would move on, she would rebuild her life, and she would make sure her children grew up in a home where honesty and integrity mattered more than anything. The hardest part, however, was yet to come. They still had to tell the children, and the world would soon know. Brad's affair, his betrayal, was no longer just a family secret. It would soon be exposed to everyone. But Emily was done hiding the truth. She was done living a lie. The fallout from the confrontation was swift and brutal. Emily had expected anger, perhaps even some pleading from Brad, but she hadn't anticipated just how far he would go to protect himself. In the days following their conversation, Brad's behavior shifted dramatically. Instead of owning up to his betrayal, he became defensive, shutting down emotionally, and retreating further into himself. He refused to apologize, refusing to show any real remorse for what he had done. Instead, he began to make excuses, blaming the stress of work, the pressures of fatherhood, even Emily herself, for the affair. Emily, for the first time in their marriage, felt truly alone. Despite Brad's cold indifference, Emily knew she had to take control of the situation. She couldn't allow herself to be buried under the weight of his lies any longer. She decided that she would take action, that she would expose the truth, even if it meant enduring more pain. She started by speaking with a divorce lawyer, seeking legal advice on how to proceed with separating their assets and managing their children. It was a difficult decision to make, but she knew it was the only path forward. She couldn't continue living in a house built on deception and mistrust. The life she had known had been shattered, and now it was time to move on. As she began the process of pulling her life together, Emily's thoughts turned to the future. She knew there would be challenges ahead. There were children to think about, a house to sell, and a community that would soon learn the truth. But as painful as it was, Emily found strength in the idea of moving forward. She wasn't going to let Brad's actions define her. She wasn't going to let her future be shaped by the lies he had told. One day, as she was finalizing the paperwork for the divorce, she received a phone call that changed everything. It was from the police. They informed her that Brad had gone missing. At first, Emily thought it was just a misunderstanding. Brad had always been the type to disappear when he needed space, often taking off on short, impromptu trips to clear his mind. But this was different. The police were concerned. They had found his car abandoned in a remote part of town, and there were no signs of him anywhere nearby. Emily's heart raced as she tried to make sense of it. Had something happened to him? Had he been hurt? Or was this just another way for him to escape responsibility? Days passed without any updates, and the tension in Emily's life only deepened. The children, oblivious to the drama unfolding, asked where their father was, but Emily had no answers. She reassured them that he would return soon, though doubt crept into her voice. In the back of her mind, a nagging fear grew. What if Brad was doing this on purpose? What if he had staged his disappearance to avoid facing the consequences of his actions? The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like something he would do. But she couldn't allow herself to believe that, not fully. The man she had once trusted was capable of anything, it seemed. It wasn't until a week later that the police confirmed the worst. Brad's body had been discovered in a park on the outskirts of town. He had been shot. The details were still unclear, but it was obvious that his death was no accident. Emily was shocked, unable to fully process the news. Her mind raced as she tried to understand how things had spiraled so out of control. Was this connected to the affair? Had the mistress, Allison, been involved, or was this something more sinister? The investigation revealed that Brad's death had been a result of a violent confrontation. The police initially focused on Emily as a suspect, considering the timing of the events. But as the investigation progressed, they discovered something even more shocking. Allison, the mistress, had vanished the same day Brad's body was found. It became clear that she had been deeply affected by Brad's betrayal, but no one had anticipated that it would end in violence. The police were still piecing together the events, but the situation was becoming more complicated by the minute. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed that the affair had been the catalyst for everything that had gone wrong. Emily was left to grapple with a terrifying reality. Her life, once so simple and full of hope, had been shattered by betrayal, lies, and ultimately death. The mystery of Brad's demise was still unfolding, but one thing was certain. His actions had led to his tragic end. Emily now faced an uncertain future, one without Brad, one without the man she had once believed was her partner. But even in the face of such darkness, she knew one thing for sure. She would survive. She would protect her children, rebuild her life, and ensure that Brad's secrets would not define her. The truth had been exposed, and now Emily had to find a way to live with it and move forward.